Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are so thrilled to have you with us today for a very important conversation, which is about the future of protection for refugee women. This is a dialogue to mark the 75th anniversary of the 1951 Refugee Convention. The actual date is July 28th, and this conversation kicks off our marking of this important event, our looking at the very real issues, challenges, and threats that refugees and refugee women are facing around the world. But also, it is a very important moment for us to highlight the women leaders on the front lines who are making a difference every day in the lives of displaced women and vulnerable people. My name is Dr. Xanthi Sharf. I'm the new president and CEO of the Women's Refugee Commission. This is my first public conversation with our partners, and I am so deeply honored to have this opportunity to listen and to learn today and to welcome all of you here into this ongoing conversation. Um, I'll do some quick housekeeping for everyone. We do have language interpretation in French and Arabic. You can select the globe icon at the bottom of the screen. One of our panelists will be speaking in Arabic, so you can be ready to use the language that you need. We do want you to ask questions. We'll have some time at the end, so please do feel free to write into the Q&A at any time, and we will do our best. We hope to have even more questions than we can answer because we want this to be a continuing conversation, and we will stay in touch with you from Women's Refugee Commission. We encourage you to sign up for our newsletter so that we can welcome you into our community and keep this conversation going. So, first, the future of protection. This is what we're here to talk about today with this very important 75-year anniversary of the 1951 Refugee Convention, which was born out of the ashes of the Second World War, and it created standards and commitments which have been transformative in the lives of millions, while even being flawed in terms of country implementation. But it has set a framework that's been important, but today feels very much under attack because of rising anti-refugee sentiment and a long-standing and brewing backlash on women's rights, which we see today, but we've seen for years. Now, we also know, even amid this landscape, which is very discouraging, that women leaders have answers. They're on the ground, they're in communities, they're at national, they're at global level. They know the way forward, and if we listen to them, we will find ways. The problem is often that these voices are not getting the full attention that they deserve. And that's part of why we're here today. And that is part of Women Refugee Commission's mission, is to make sure that we can help to amplify these voices, amplify the work of these researchers, and ensure that our global and other networks are being driven by realities on the ground. WRC is proud to be part of a broader civil society coalition, and we have produced a joint call to action for 2026, marking this anniversary. Last week, we had a civil society coalition event in Geneva. The UN Refugee Agency is also convening a series of global, regional, and national dialogues to look at how to strengthen the implementation of this refugee convention. Again, as a new CEO here at Women's Refugee Commission, this is the conversation that I am so deeply honored to be a part of. It is fitting and fortunate that we have with us a very important UNHCR, UN Refugee Agency leader with us today to kick off. Reuven Menigvela has worked at UNHCR for 36 years and brings unparalleled insight into the reality of protection for refugee women around the world. So, Reuven, we welcome you to give us some introductory framing here. What does the future of protection for refugee women look like? And what does it take to ensure that women are shaping the decisions that affect their lives?
Thank you, Xanthi, and thanks a lot for inviting me to this event. And really, kudos to the Women's Refugee Commission for having organized this dialogue, because I think it's absolutely critical that we have these kinds of dialogues now more than ever. And again, also personally, congratulations to you on assuming the functions of the CEO of the Women's Refugee Commission. And I know you'll do an amazing job with a really amazing organization. And also a special tribute to all the women leaders on the panel and those who are attending this online. Really, you do you literally are on the front lines doing the work that needs to be done. I mean, I'm safely ensconced here behind my desk and talking to you, but you know the realities on the ground even better than I do. So I just want to really pay a special tribute to all of you who are on the front lines, in the trenches, doing the work that needs to be done. So thank you for that. So as Zanti was saying, this is a critical, well, not a critical year, but a very important year for UNHCR and for the broader refugee community, because this is the 75th anniversary of the existence of the Refugee Convention of 1951. Now, when the 51 Convention was drafted, there was absolutely no inkling that this convention was going to last more than a few years at best. And that is why the initial refugee definition literally referred to events that had occurred before January 1951 and basically limited its remit to Europe. But 75 years later, here we are, still talking about, having some of the largest numbers of forcibly displaced people in the world today. We have over 118 million forcibly displaced people around the world, out of whom about 43 million are refugees, and the rest are either internally displaced, about 68 to 70 million, and the others are asylum seekers and others in situations of displacement. So the world has not improved, and the convention is now more relevant than ever. And as we know, of course, in 1967, the geographical and the temporal limitations are removed from the convention. So the 67 protocol basically acknowledged the reality that this convention was there to stay, that it was not going to be considered, null and void for the immediate future or even the long-term future. So here we are, 75 years later. This convention is needed now more than ever. It has saved millions of lives in the past. It will continue to save millions of lives in the future. But what is disturbing at this point in time is the extent to the world we live in. The world is hugely divided politically. You don't need me to tell you that. You see this every time you scroll through your social media networks, and you see it in traditional forms of media as well. You have some of the world's biggest and most powerful leaders not being able to agree on the most fundamental issues relating to human rights and humanitarian law. And, we don't even have the excuse of 1935 or 1939 to 1945, when all of these horrendous atrocities were being committed. We could say, look, we didn't know this was happening at the time. We only knew about the enormity of the massacres, etc., that were committed. We only knew about it several years after all of this had happened. We don't have that excuse now. We're literally seeing the atrocities happening on the ground in front of us in real time on social media, and we're still incapable of dealing with the reality of this and trying to resolve these absolutely catastrophic humanitarian situations that we're seeing in the world today. And I think history will judge us all extremely harshly for having stood aside and watched this happen without trying to resolve these situations. And just to provide a reality check, there are almost 100 conflicts happening around the world today, involving at least 150 member states. And as Pope Francis said once, he said, I don't know why you keep talking about a possibility of a World War III. He said, it's actually happening right now. It's just that we haven't connected the dots. And that really is a reality in which we are working. And why am I saying this? It's because that lack of political will to resolve some of the most dire humanitarian situations or political crises of our time has a direct impact on the work that we do, because most of the world's political leaders who have some influence over these situations use humanitarian action as a substitute for political inaction. So we are needed now more than ever, we, the broader humanitarian community, in a world that's completely divided politically. But ironically, we are being told, yes, you have to step in and do what needs to be done on the humanitarian front, because we are incapable of resolving these crises politically. But at the same time, we are not being given the resources that we need to do the job that requires to be done. And the needs are greater than ever. 118 million forcibly displaced means, and not to mention the host communities as well, means that, you have roughly 1/3 of the world's population that actually is in need of humanitarian assistance. And we are unable to meet those needs because our own budgets have shrunk dramatically certainly in the last 24 months. UNHCR, yes, we went from being a $5 billion global budget organization in 2024 to having something roughly about $3 billion this year. So you can see there's been a dramatic drop. But we are not alone in this. All of you know this even better than I. Some of you who are representing small organizations have seen the direct impact this has had on your work and your ability to be able to carry out some of the core work that needs to be done. And allied with the lack of funding and the political divide is, of course, a shrinking protection space as well. You have all of these countries now, or a lot of countries, which should know better, basically questioning the validity of the 1951 Convention, saying, this is a convention that was drafted in the 20th century, in the aftermath of the Second World War. Is it really relevant? Is it really up to the challenges? Is it really fit for purpose to meet the challenges of the 21st century? And our response to that has always been a resounding yes. As I said, this is a critical document which has saved lives in the past, it will save lives in the future, and its provisions are the most basic common sense that you can think of. It's not asking for anything extravagant. It's simply saying people fleeing persecution have a right to seek asylum. If they're given asylum, then they should have basic rights like access to food, access to livelihoods, freedom of movement, access to education, and all of the things that you and I take so much for granted. We don't even think twice about it. And we are simply saying refugees should have those minimum rights as well. So nothing in that convention that you could really challenge and say, my gosh, this is extravagant and not realistic. It really isn't. It's a basic, commonsensical document that has survived 75 years and undoubtedly will be playing a critical role in the years to come as well. But unfortunately, this convention is being challenged along with a whole lot of other human rights instruments as well. We are not the only ones having to undergo this sort of very vocal criticism from certain quarters. We are seeing several of the other human rights and humanitarian law instruments as well being questioned, being completely flagrantly violated, and with absolutely no apology for it whatsoever. Now, what does this mean for women and girls? 50% of the world's forcibly displaced are women and girls. So that already means half the population that we're talking about is directly impacted by all of these different issues that I've been highlighting. And unfortunately, the most dramatic impact of the financial crisis, certainly, if not the political divide and the shrinking protection space, has been on women and girls. So just to give you a couple of bits of data, the gender-based violence programs worldwide are only 19% funded. So if you can imagine the enormity of the gap between the real needs and what is actually being provided in terms of responses. The 50% of women-led organizations, particularly local women-led organizations, were closed down last year, according to UN Women, simply because there was they were not able to carry out the activities, not even able to exist because of a lack of funding, the dramatic cutbacks that have happened in the last 24 months. On a more practical level, in terms of what's happening again with the forcibly displaced, we have had safe spaces being closed down. We've had vocational training and schools for refugee girls being closed down in dramatic numbers in many of these countries that are hosting refugees. And again, this is not a trend that's going to stop anytime soon. Because the financial situation is obviously hasn't gotten any better this year. And, as it was bad enough last year, it's certainly not getting any better this year. And all of us are grappling with this. So two options for, facing us as we move forward. One is to sit around admiring the problem. We can do that ad nauseum, but that's not going to get us anywhere. And that's certainly not what you, the practitioners, want or are looking for. The other is to say, okay, we have this real issue. We know that we're never going to get the kind of money that we're going to need for all of the activities that need to be done. So what do we do moving forward? And again, this is why this kind of dialogue, Zanti, is so important, because partnerships is key. None of us can do this on our own. It has to be, there has to be solidarity in numbers. It has to be all of us working in tandem to be able to convince, for example, donors on the criticality of gender equality and gender-based violence programs and the need to maintain these programs in critical operations. So partnerships is key. Prioritization is key, because in order to convince donors that we actually are looking at, and you see this in many donors going like, oh, the UN, bloated bureaucracy, wasting taxpayers' money on useless programs that have no immediate impact. So we have to demonstrate to our donor base that basically we are prioritizing. That critically means, what are the activities that are so critical that we simply have to continue doing them, because without that, it literally can mean life or death to women and girls. What is it? And then also critically, what are the activities that because of a lack of funding, we would have liked to do, but we can no longer do, and we need to walk away from? And I've got to tell you, from UNHCR's own internal experience, that is one of the toughest things to do. And
Yeah.
the humanitarian community is talking about prioritization and also hyper prioritization, which is a dreadful word, which is being adopted now because of the fact that funding has become so reduced that even the prioritization exercise is no longer relevant because the money is the amounts are so small that we have to prioritize amongst the priorities. So key to determine what do we continue doing and what do we walk away from, because donors want to know that. The other thing is packaging. Messaging to donors is critical in this regard. And again, we've learned this through bitter experience here in UNHCR. Protection activities, and it's not a coincidence that GBV programs are funded only at 19%. It's because these are the kinds of programs that are impossible to present to donors in terms that they understand. For example, we have broadened our donor base to include also the private sector for the last 10, 15 years. They have been a consistent donor to us and given us between $600 to $700 million a year. And they are fast becoming our single largest donor. It's not just private corporations and foundations, it's also your individual people, your granny sitting in Barcelona who's giving $5 every month as a subscription to UNHCR programs. Those are the kinds of resources we are looking at. But in order to convince them of the importance of the programs that we are doing, the protection programs that we're doing for women and girls, you do have to message it in terms that they understand. And that is incredibly hard to do because for GBV programs, for example, you are trying to quantify results in the negative. It's like saying our GBV programs are so effective that 6,000 women did not get sexually assaulted. I mean, this is essentially, that's the kind of thing that's impossible to demonstrate. It's not like shelter programs and food programs where you can actually say, 2 million refugees actually had shelters built for them, or 6 million refugees had food provided to them. So GBV programs, gender empowerment, gender equality programs are really hard to quantify in terms of results, the measurable impact and the results that donors look for. And this is where messaging is key, that we need to provide.
I want to come in and underscore a little bit what you're saying, because this is so powerful. And what I'm hearing from you are these are real lessons for this audience. I hear you saying partnership, prioritize, package. And these are challenges that we do face every day. How are we going to get to the new people? You talked about going down from 5 billion to 3 billion in funding, while the numbers of displacement are really rising. So, Reuben, we're going to turn to this incredible group of women who are on the ground. Thank you for paying tribute to them. Would you round us out with just a last word for these women, a last word of encouragement or advice? And we're going to start to hear from these front lines, but I cannot thank you enough for being with us here today and bringing us this global perspective that we all need. We need this information in order to magnify the work on the ground.
Thanks, Ankit. You resumed it perfectly. It's exactly that. It's partnerships, prioritization, and packaging or messaging. And understand that the legal framework is there. That's what the 1951 Convention is about. And this is what we need to emphasize in this. It's 75th year. Legal framework is there. It's not going to go anywhere. It's going to be there for the foreseeable future. Build on it and use it as a basis for really trying to drum up the kind of funding that we require. And all of you're on the front lines. You can do this way better than we can. Us sitting behind a desk here, you are working in the trenches and you know what the needs are. You know what the messages are that the displaced women are communicating to you. And those are the messages we need to carry to the donor community as well. And Xanthi, just to say a special word of thanks to the Women's Refugee Commission, because you guys have been amazing. You have been a key partner for us going, definitely in the past, but also moving forward. And part of what you and we have been doing in collaboration will be useful, I think, certainly for a lot of the participants listening in, is really adapting some of the tools that we have, that you have helped us to really adapt them to apply in the field in terms of, for fundraising, for livelihoods programs and stuff, but to be seen through a GBV lens. You have really helped us to do that. And that's the kind of work that also needs to be done. It's not sexy, but it's key because those are the kinds of tools that are also going to be convincing the donors. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much, Reuven Menik-Dvala. We are so honored to have you with us. We are going to turn now to our panelists. And what we want to hear from each of you, I'm going to start by introducing you all. We'll have fuller bios coming up in the chat. Hanan Ahmed is the External Relations Officer for Sudan's Emergency Response Rooms. network, and she has founded multiple other initiatives as well. She's a serial founder, if you will. She's the author of an upcoming policy brief on the role of women-led organizations in protecting Sudanese women, and she's a frequent collaborator with Women's Refugee Commission, including with to this report, which we did in 2024 about Sudan as well. She has deep firsthand experience of providing community-based protection and support to women displaced by war. And we're looking forward to hearing about her new initiatives as well. Latifa Alavi is a lecturer in law at the University of Strasbourg in France. She is also a Women's Refugee Commission Humanitarian Futures Fellow. We have 6 fellows across Africa and Asia who we are collaborating with and promoting their research and work on the ground as well. So very happy to have Latifa here to speak about her work. She's worked with NGOs on women's rights in Afghanistan, as well as refugee rights in Iran. Laura Valencia is one of the leaders of the Global Refugee Youth Network, which we sometimes call GRIN, which Women's Refugee Commission helped to launch and host. And this network helps to boost youth refugee voices into the halls of power around the world. Laura is from Colombia. She is in Ecuador today, and she works to support young people with experiences of displacement to meaningfully shape policy. Rasha Al-Tabshi is a journalist, feminist researcher. I can say we're all feminists here, and the executive director of the Warshay team in Syria. Rasha has extensively documented the testimonies of Syrian women impacted by war, and she's a longstanding partner of ours here at WRC and the Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights. So the first question, I'll come to you, Hanin, first. Tell us about your journey and how it's experienced your leadership today.
Thanks so much for you and for the WRC, always provoking women voices in terms of speaking in the panels, writing policies, and also, providing advices for all of us across the globe. My leadership journey is shaped earlier when I was in the high school. I volunteered in different initiative, and I founded, as you mentioned, different initiative supporting women. And then I rose up and protested out of the street following the regime in 2019. And when war broke out, my life is reshaped, completely different. My personality reshaped. So I was on the ground, and I was working as a researcher and gender advisor for the Department of State, U.S. Department of State in Sudan. And then I realized that by the sense I have of the women, of a young lady, this war is not going to stop soon. So I didn't stop idly by, but I founded Old Omdurman Emergency Response Room. And then I helped to network emergency response room until we became Sudan emergency response room of 26,000 volunteers on the ground. At that time, I work on the ground when evacuating women, and I've been subjected to harassment, subjected to killing for a different time. And the RSF, they put the guns on my head for more than 6 times. And then when at that time, someone told me like, Hanin, your name is top listed for the RSF. And honestly, I didn't fled because of I'm afraid to being killed, but I'm afraid to being raped. This is the main reasons of why I fled from Khartoum to the northern state. I became an IDB. I didn't stop either, but I also started initiative to help women and IDBs in the northern state. And then after 2 months, I fled to Cairo with my family. At that time, I saw Cairo's gloomy, and it was so great for me. Although I love this country for a life. It's been a second home for me. And I start thinking about I lost everything, but I keep working to help people also in Sudan. And I remember one day I didn't sleep for in August 2023, I didn't sleep for 4 days because I was helping with mass evacuation on the ground to help people who fled from area in Khartoum. And after that, I came to the US. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. right now, but I keep advocate for the emergency response room. And after 3 years now, I realized that we need to evolve for a new body. So last year, I won the Anne von Fürstenberg Award for Extraordinary Women Leaders. And with that grant, 100K, I started a new initiative to help refugees women in Cairo and in Chad, in Kampala as well. We start working on the ground. And I know there is a lot of colleagues from UNHCR. I'm not going to criticize you, but I'm saying that those countries are ratifying the International Refugee Convention, but there is no actual work for the refugees. As a woman, I see this is insane for the sisters, from mother sisters from Sudan, from Palestine, and from Chad. They are being hijacked to harassment, to rape, just for a pool for Fafapine. So there is no actual work on the ground from the UNHCR. There is no protection. The yellow card is not a real protection for a lady or a woman. And those are the most vulnerable category from the community. At least men can defend themselves, but women cannot do anything. And they are in a really bad situation. But also there is a good success stories that when we give them the vocational training, we give them those kind of fund, and some of the countries are issued laws to prevent refugees from work. When we give them that training, one of them, she's been harassed at different times. At right now, her children are her. They are able to relocate in a safe area, and they are able to get a safe space and money to eat every day, and there is no harassment anymore. And this is just $1,000. There is not much money you can spend, but it just completely localized fund. And my final message, it's going to be like, we need the solidarity, that if a woman is painting in Adri in Chad, every woman, despite your ethnicity, despite your religious, despite your age or position, you are going to stand behind her, and you are going to help her, like what WRC providing to every woman that link in their network. Thank you so much.
Haneen, thank you so much. You made this very real, and all of our hearts are breaking with you and with the women in Sudan and the women around the world. And this is a life or death matter. And thank you for sharing that with us so we can get grounded, because we don't have time to waste. There are lives at stake. There are women and their families at stake. Thank you so much for what you just shared. Latifa, I'm coming to you. Share with us a little bit about your journey and your leadership today.
Yes, thank you so much for this question, for organizing this event. My journey of displacement started in 1919 when I was 5 years old. At the time, the atrocity committed during the Soviet Union invasions, followed by civil war, forced millions to flee their homes, including my family, who accepted that if 2 children out of 7 died during the hard journey, it would be worth it if the others survived. From Afghanistan, we went to Iran, a neighboring country that hosted the largest population of Afghans, mostly religious and ethnic minority of Shia and Hazara origins. Upon returning to Afghanistan, I started working as a social worker in the Kabul women prison, and witnessing the victims of a judicial system that was neither independent nor impartial made me decide to study law. I left for Europe and received my PhD in international law in France with a strong objective of returning to my country, improving the legal situation, and making it a safer place for women and for those who decided to return. However, this dream was never realized as the Taliban came to power, leading to an unwanted exile that continued to these days. Experienced displacement also shaped the area of my research. As a research fellow now with the Women Refugee Convention, I study intersectionality and access to maternal health care for women forcibly returned to Afghanistan from Iran in 2025. Thank you.
Thank you, Latifa. That's your journey, and Haneen, thank you both for your incredible stories. Laura, coming to you now. share with us a bit about your journey and your work for youth from Ecuador, but for youth around the world.
Thank you, Shante. And I want to say thank you to Janine and Latifa also for sharing their stories. I think it's something really incredible just to listen directly from them. What are the situation in different contexts? So in my case, my journey with displacement began when I was 12 years old. I'm originally from Colombia, as you mentioned before, and like many people affected by conflict and violence, displacement was not a single moment, but a life-changing process that shaped who I am today. Growing up as a displaced girl and later as a refugee woman in Ecuador, I had to navigate new environments, adapt to a different education system, build a sense of belonging, and learn how to move forward despite uncertainty. The process of obtaining refugee status took us 7 years, which made it very difficult for my family to access services and fully integrate into the system. During that time, our case was reviewed multiple times, and we often felt that we could lose our protection at any moment. Access to education was also a major challenge because I did not have documents to validate my studies from Colombia. It took me 2 years to formally enroll in school after a long and complicated process. Many institutions were unwilling to accept me because of that. And like many refugee women and girls, I experienced barriers to education, uncertainty about the future, and the feeling that you constantly have to prove that you belong. At the same time, my story is also one of opportunity. I was fortunate to meet people and organizations that believe in me and invest in my potential through education, mentorship, and opportunities that participate in leadership and advocacy spaces. I began to see my experience as a refugee was not something that limited me. It was something that gave me the unique perspective and a strong sense of purpose. What transformed my life was not charity. It was inclusion. It was being given the opportunity to participate, to contribute, and to lead. Because of my experience and my involvement with refugee youth groups, I was invited to participate in national consultations with young refugees taking place in different countries. And later in the global consultation held in 2016, the Women's Refugee Commission was also part of this. For the first time, I was able to connect with young refugees from very different contexts and hearing about the challenges that they were facing. While our experiences were different, many of the barriers were similar: access to education, documentation, livelihoods, participation, and protection. What was particularly powerful was realizing that while we were sharing challenges, we were also working together to identify solutions and recommendations. Those consultations showed me that the value of bringing refugee voices into decision-making spaces, and they reinforce the belief that people with lived experience should be part of shaping policies that affect their lives. Following that process, I was selected as a member of the first Global Youth Advisory Council of UNHCR. Throughout this journey, the Women's Refugee Commission was also part of that process, supporting and strengthening spaces for refugee youth participation. In this role, I had the opportunity to engage more formally with UNHCR and other stakeholders, contributing to discussions on refugee inclusion, youth participation, education, protection, and others. It was one of my first experiences influencing in policy conversation at global levels. And it showed me how important it is for refugee women and young people to have a seat at the table. That experience ultimately shaped the path I continue to follow today. For more than 10 years, I have worked alongside refugee youth and refugee-led organizations, supporting young leaders who are creating change in their community. And today, throughout my role with the Global Refugee Youth Network, or GREEN, I have the privilege of working with refugee youth leaders from different regions of the world who are responding to crisis, advocating for rights, supporting their communities, and building solutions from the ground. My experience has shown me that displacement does not define a person's potential. What often makes the difference is whether systems recognize refugees, especially refugee women, not only as people in need of protection, but as leaders, experts, and partners in creating solutions. That is why I continue doing this work, because every refugee woman deserves safety, protection, and the opportunity to be heard, to lead, and to influence in decisions that affect their lives and their futures.
Thank you, Laura. I wrote down, it was not charity that changed my life, but inclusion. And I think that's the theme today, which is we need to listen to the people who have the information and the commitment and the credibility within communities. And that's what this call is all about. So thank you for laying that out to us. Rasha, thank you for joining us today. Share with us about your journey and your leadership to promote citizen rights, both for Syrians and for people around the world.
شكرا كثير لهي
شكراً.
الفرصة اليوم أني أقدر أوصل صوت النساء السوريات اللاجئات في دول العالم. أنا اسمي رشا، صحفية وباحثة سورية مقيمة وأعمل حاليا بألمانيا. بس للأسف طريقي للأمان ما كان سهل كثير. أخذ مني تقريبا 11 سنة لقدرت أحصل على أوراق رسمية في ألمانيا. قصتي بديت ب 2012 لما قررت أنا وعائلتي الهرب من سوريا بعد بدء الثورة السورية بسبب خوفنا من الاعتقال، لأن كنا مطلوبين للنظام السوري السابق. كان الهدف من اللجوء هو البحث عن الأمان. بس للأسف ما لقيته، لأني علقت بدوامة التقديم على أوراق الإقامة الإنسانية أو السياحية أو بطاقة حماية اللجوء. ضليت سنين طويلة عم حارب وحاول إني أحصل على أي ورقة، ولكن للأسف كله كان يتواجه بالرفض دون بيان أسباب واضحة يعني. حتى الاعتقال اللي هربت منه بسوريا تعرضت له بتركيا لعدة أيام، وتعرضت لتفتيش ذاتي جدا مذل ومهين لإجباري للتوقيع على ورقة إعادة طوعية إلى سوريا. وهذا بسبب أني لا أحمل الأوراق اللي هن منعوني أني أخذها. عشت سنوات كثيرة كشخص غير موجود على أي سيستم، لأنه حتى صفة اللاجئ أنا لم أستطع أني أحصل عليها بهي السنوات. طبعا كان دائما خوف الاعتقال الثاني بتركيا أو الترحيل القسري كان دائما ملاحقني خلال هاي السنوات، لحتى وصلت للحظة هي بعتبرها فاصلة بحياتي العملية كمان. لما تسكرت الأبواب قدامي بتركيا حاولت أني أتقدم لطلبات لجوء بدول أخرى، ولكن للأسف كمان كان في رفض لمرتين لطلبات اللجوء. فإحدى الصديقات قالت لي جملة ما بنساها، اللي هي إذا كنتي حامل فممكن طلب لجوءك ينقبل بنسبة 70%. فأنا هون كنت قدام خيار كتير صعب، أني أنجب طفل على هذا العالم لأستخدمه أنا كأداة يمنحني اللجوء والأمان، أو إني أبقى بلا أوراق رسمية. ولأن أنا وزوجي مثل ما قلت مطلوبين من النظام السوري السابق ومحرومين من حقوقنا المدنية، وأنا ما عندي أوراق بتركيا، فزواجنا غير مثبت، وبالتالي أي طفل أنا رح أنجبه رح يكون عديم الجنسية وفقا للقوانين السورية. هذا الواقع خلاني أخذ هذا القرار الصعب كتير، اللي هو أنه نحن لا ننجب أطفال أبدا، لأن إنجابي أي طفل مثل ما قلت هو رح يكون عديم جنسية ورح يعيش كشخص غير موجود وغير حاصل على أي حق من الحقوق. ولكن قراري كان هذا الشيء مقابل أنه أنا رح أبقى بلا أوراق رسمية، وما كانت صعبة، ولكن كانت أفضل من إنجاب طفل عديم جنسية. هذا المأزق بصراحة خلاني ابحث أكثر عن قوانين الجنسية بسوريا وارتباطها بموضوع اللجوء، خاصة بدول اللجوء المجاورة لسوريا. يعني تفاجأنا بحجم المشاكل اللي بتتعرض لها النساء السوريات بكل دول اللجوء المجاورة. في كثير من النساء اللي تواصلنا معهم اضطروا انه هن يتخلوا عن اطفالهم لازواجهم الاجانب مقابل انه هن اطفالهم يحصلوا على جنسيات لانه الام ما عندها اوراق ثبوتيه. كثير من النساء اضطروا كمان يتركوا اطفالهم مثلا بدول ثانيه لحتى هن يقدروا يرجعوا على سوريا، يعني صار في انفصال بالعائله الواحده. كل هذا خلانا بفريق ورشه نتبنى قضيه حق المراه بمنح الجنسيه بسوريا وتوثيق قصص النساء السوريات اللاجئات في دول اللجوء، لأنه بنعرف تماما أنه القوانين الجنسية أو أنظمة اللجوء هي ما فقط أوراق أو ما فقط اتفاقيات، بالعكس هي ممكن تكون أحيانا هي ورقة ضغط على النساء نفسهم. ممكن تخليهم يتخلوا عن حقوقهم تجاه أطفالهم أو يتخلوا عن حقوقهم الشخصية بالإنجاب أو باستطاعتهم إنه هن يربوا أطفالهم بشيء من الكرامة. شكرا.
Thank you so much, Rasha. I can't thank each of you enough for sharing these stories. And I think as much as these experiences are, each person has lived a very different life, just as human beings and as fellow champions and advocates, we can try to relate or try to think about the ways in which we can support you. And this call really is about supporting the front lines. Now, I will say we do have a number of questions, and of course, there's never enough time. The most important thing on this call is for all of us to know you and to know your work. So as we have questions come in, I'll just apologize to the audience. We won't be able to get to very many. We may be able to get to one question at the end, but we can't end this call without hearing at least a word from each of you about what we can do to support you, what needs to be done, what is the work that you are doing. So I'm going to do a fast round to come through and just leave us with that most important message about your work or how we can support you. We've heard a bit about your work in the first round, but help us to make sure we don't forget. So Henin, you talked about this incredible honor of receiving the Diane von Furstenberg Award. I'm familiar with this award. This is given to some of the most prominent feminists in the world. I'm so thrilled that you had that support. And I know you are doing new work to promote and support other women leaders. Please tell us about that. And if you'd like, how we can support you. At least we can help to amplify the story.
Thank you so much. So the new initiative is Women Network for Development. We are amplifying women voices, empower them financially and in terms of skills in Cairo, in Chad, in Kampala, and in on the ground in Sudan, in different states, as we have the accessibility. And as I said, that women, I realized that women life is being changed in just 3 or 4 months since we start. We need localized and restricted fund to be able to relocate those women and provide all the needs that they want. Also, we are partnering with many organizations who are providing kind of social support. So we need more funds. We need to be amplified, as many initiatives that I did, the international community helped me. And in terms of the other thing that we need, not only for this initiative, but also for the women on the ground, because recently we heard that one of the organization, they're fired their employees because they are being, the beneficiaries are being harassed by them. This is a great action that we need. but we need from the bigger organization like UNHCR, more concrete and strong policies are being implemented that can be implemented in programs and projects on the ground to protect those women. And we need a strong action toward governments who are not protecting the refugees. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanan. Thank you. Latifa.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
I have two general recommendations for civil society actors, all states and policymakers. And the most important one is that to stop deportations, to work on stopping deportation to Afghanistan. And we know that there is a new trend of dialogue and conclusions of mutual agreements between European states and the Taliban Authority regarding the deportations of Afghans. And so forced deportation to Afghanistan is contrary to the essence of the Refugee Convention, because the country is not only facing the gender apartheid, but also several human rights violations have placed ethnic and religious minorities, LGBT community, displaced persons, and those who work with the previous government at the risk of persecution. And just last Friday, in my hometown of Daikundi, a young man named Yasser Husseini, who was served as a member of the Afghan National Army under the previous government, was shot dead in the market after returning to Afghanistan from Tajikistan. He left behind his wife and two children and unborn one. And the other suggestion is that for UNHCR, it's really the time to reinterpret the Refugee Convention, and also including the persecution or threat to the lives when the states are unwilling or unable to protect the individual from the impacts of environmental injustice, which is happening now in Afghanistan, because in addition to 4 decades of war insecurity, the country is among the 6 most affected by climate change, largely due to the transnational effect of environmental crisis. So drought, severe floods, and desertation are forcing thousands of people to leave their homes and land in search of basic necessity and also survival.
Thank you, Latifa. And one of the things I love about what you and Hanan have shared is that, of course, there's work to do at global multilateral level. There's advocacy to do towards the UN organizations and the governments and those who are making these large policies and prioritizing or deprioritizing protection for women. But you also talked about your initiatives and civil society initiatives and supporting research. And I think that's something that we all need to hear, which is that in addition to being policy advocates, which is often a professional way to engage, civil society members or individuals can also make a tremendous difference by funding initiatives, but also simply amplifying so that more people learn about this. Because while probably most of us on this call are already committed advocates, we surely have some new people on the call who are learning about this issue because of what's going on in the world and want to make a difference, and they want to know what initiatives they can support. And we want support to go to locally led initiatives and initiatives that are led by people with lived experience and researchers who have been on the ground, who have given their lives, in your case, Latifa, to even working inside prisons with deeply impacted populations. So I love for our audience to keep in mind that there are so many ways to make a difference, sometimes even amplifying a story about the work can get it to the right person who can fund, support, or open a door. And so we have an active audience here. So Laura, coming to you, we want to hear what you feel most needs to be done today and how we can support and better understand the very active work of GRIN, the Global Refugee Youth Network.
Thank you for that question. So something that it's really important to recognize is that refugee women face multiple barriers. So protection must be practical, but and immediate. And often what happens with the systems is that they overlook the multiple forms of exclusion. Normally, women can face at the same time being young and at the same time being a refugee. So it's important that the systems recognize all these vulnerabilities, but at the same time, the potential. What I think it's really important, the governments needs to ensure fast access of legal documents, safe housing, education, and income opportunities. With the different experience that we heard, I think different aspects of this was mentioned and the difficulties that they all this brings. It's really important to be recognized through the governments and how this can be improved to make more safe, especially for women. Donors needs to fund refugee-led and women-led organizations directly. As you mentioned, localization, it's a critical, important point at this moment. And UN agencies and NGOs should create safe spaces and include young women in designing programs from the start. I think all the programs that are created for refugees normally, the impact is not the biggest that they want, because normally they don't take into account the refugees themselves into that process of knowing what is needed in the communities. So the refugees themselves is the ones that needs to be involved in that process. From Green's work, the Global Refugee Youth Network, we see that many girls, especially those out of school, young mothers of survivors of violence, are often left out of these programs or these processes. Simple actions that target outreach, flexible programs, and leadership opportunities can make a big difference, especially with those groups. In short, protection works best when young refugee women are supported to lead and not only just to receive support.
Thank you so much, Laura. And that makes me think about, like you said, the people who have the most wisdom and knowledge will need support in order to be able to fully show up in these conversations. And so there is a robust engagement that's necessary for us to find the best solutions. Rasha, coming to you now to hear about what you think the future of protection looks like when it comes to citizenship, what needs to be done, and how can we support your work?
هلا نحن اليوم عم نناقش فقط نصوص اتفاقيات، بس عم نناقش فعليا مصير ملايين من النساء. لنضمن انه تكون حماية المرأة ضمن هاي النقاشات يعني فعالية او عملية اكثر، لازم اولا نوقف، وأنا هذا باعتقادي، نوقف عن التعامل مع الحماية كمنظومة إدارية متقلبة. السبب إنه الواقع اللي عم نعيشه حاليا، الحماية فيه تحولت من حق إنساني مطلق لمعاملات ورقية معقدة أكثر من إنها تكون تسهل حياة النساء. أي امرأة اليوم، عم بحكي على النساء السوريات بشكل خاص بدول اللجوء، إذا تأخرت أو تعطلت أي إجراء من الإجراءات اللي عم تقوم فيها، فهذا عم بيفقدها كثير من الحقوق، وعم بيفقدها كمان حق، عم بيفقدها هي وأطفالها كثير من الحقوق. لهيك بعتقد إنه لازم نركز على تحصين الوضع القانوني للاجئات، من إنه يكون هو رهينة مثلا للتقلبات السياسية أو التسويات السياسية. شيء آخر، إنه لما بنحكي عن مستقبل الحماية، عفوا، لازم نملك الشجاعة لحتى نواجه مسألة المساءلة والمحاسبة والمراقبة للدول المستضيفة. نحن بحاجة ماسة لآليات دولية صارمة بتحاسب الحكومات المضيفة اللي بتستخدم القوانين وأوراق الإقامة لتكون ضغط على النساء أو استغلالهم، عفوا، لأنه هذا الشيء بيؤدي لاستغلالهم للأسف جسديا وماليا واقتصاديا. لازم ما يتم توظيف، كمان بيؤدي لتوظيف الترحيل القسري والاحتجاز لكسر إرادتهم. غياب هي المساءلة أو المراقبة بترك النساء يعني ضحية سهلة للاستغلال الاقتصادي والجسدي. كمان بحكم عملي على قضية الجنسية وحق المرأة منح الجنسية، بعتقد لازم نلاقي طريقة أو رابط بين بين برامج اللجوء الدولية وبين الضغط على الدول اللي عندها التمييز القانوني بحق المرأة بمنح الجنسية. لازم يكون في رابط بين هاي البرامج وبين قوانين إصلاح الجنسية، لأنه الواقع القانوني بكثير من الدول ومنها سوريا اللي هو بيمنع المرأة من منح جنسيتها لأطفالها، عم يحط النساء أمام خيارات مستحيلة يعني، وعم بيعرض الأطفال لأنهم يكونوا عديمي جنسية. فعليا ما بعتقد فينا نحكي عن اتفاقيات دولية إذا ما كان في حلول للمستقبل، إذا ما كان في، إذا كنا عم نتجاهل عفوا هذا الخلل الهيكلي بقضية الجنسية اللي هو بيهدد استقرار الأسر ومستقبل الأجيال بكامل. شكرا.
Thank you so much, Rasha. And this is a global issue, absolutely. And I think just as Haneen said, the fate of one woman is the fate of every woman, in her own words, which were more eloquent. I hear you saying as well that these citizenship rights are important in Syria, but they're important in countries around the world. They impact women in particular, and they impact women's children. And I know from the global campaign work that there are over 20 countries in the world where a woman does not have the equal right to pass citizenship to her children. So this is a really vital issue. This right to have a citizenship, to have documents, to be able to access basic rights and needs is a global issue. And the more we advance in one country, the more we advance globally. And so that need to band together and to look at these issues around the world is so critical. And so thank you for that work for the Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights, which Women's Refugee Commission is very proud to host and to work with you on. Now we do have the opportunity to come to the audience. We have quite a number of questions coming in. I'm thrilled that I can give voice to some of these questions. And again, we will continue this conversation from today. I'm going to read a question about Afghanistan. Given that many Afghan refugees are living in protracted displacement with limited prospects for voluntary return, and with resettlement cases taking years to process, how can humanitarian organizations ensure sustainable protection and safeguarding for these girls and women in the face of declining funding, without creating service gaps that increase their vulnerability? So, Latifa, we'd like to hear from you. It's a hard answer, and we've heard you say about the importance of stopping these forced returns. But yeah.
We always, when we talk about giving this perspective of supporting Afghans women and all of this issue, we should be ensure that an individual focused approach to women protection should not be ended up with separating them from their families. For example, I can give you an example of the European Court of Justice, which has ruled that being a woman alone can make a basis for granting asylum to Afghan women in Europe. But the main, which is a very, very successful decisions in interpretation of the general of the Refugee Convention. But the most important question is to ask how it could be implemented in practice for women who have no access to consular service inside the country, and who, in order to live outside, are forced to travel with a mahram and their families. Here is the concept how to make a balance in there and to convince these women that protections under the name of asylum will be granted to you, but you must abandon all your family relationship and qualify, and every ties that you have your family in order to be redisplaced in other places. So I think there should be a shift of approach transformation from all who works in the question of Afghan refugee, and the question of how displacement work for them, and also to be ensure how to include those who are mostly excluded because of their social identities. So these are the main challenge, and also the important one maybe related to your question.
Thank you, Latifa. I have a question that came in from Nandana Sen, who is a board member with WRC and the co-chair of our Program and Advocacy Committee on the board. She has a question that speaks to the way that health issues can also compound experiences during war. Nandana, I'm looking for your question to read it because it was so elegantly put. But essentially, this is a question about Ebola in Sudan. One moment. Coming to you, Hanan. Anandana says, I know it has not been reported in Sudan, but from my work on the ground during other epidemics, I know reporting mechanisms can be chaotic and misrepresent reality. We also know how terrifyingly easy it is for epidemics to cross borders into unprotected areas. What's your understanding of the ground reality as it pertains to Ebola in Sudan?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. There's no actual reportation for Ebola, no cases until now, but we have other epidemic like dengue fever and other unknown kind of fever are being spread across Sudan.
Thank you, Hanan. Question, which for any of you that you'd like to jump in, could you share your experience or thoughts on how any reform efforts by the UN, whether UN80 or the humanitarian reset or its member states, is actually impacting you directly, whether positively or negatively? How could it be done better? What's getting sidelined? What are the messages that you want amplified up? Feel free to jump in or just raise a hand if you want to jump in for any of our panelists that want to take this one. Laura, please.
Okay. So in my case, I'm participating on a group called Change the Code that is trying to influence, in this case, the humanitarian reset. What we believe it's really important to have young voices into all the system, because what we know until now, the front line that is responding to crisis normally are people that it's affected. And most of these groups are led by young people. So we understand that also the resources are not enough, especially for this type of groups. They are not recognized, especially for the UN system, because, for example, for refugees, if they don't have documentation, they don't have a regular way to get into the system to become an organization and to receive funding, for example. So we are pushing for that recognition of the importance of the young people at the front line, and having not only resources, it's about the programming, it's about not just only consulting these groups, it's about having them into the programs, into the implementation, but also knowing what can be improved in that process. So I think right now we don't have like a concrete ways, but we are in contact with OCHA right now in conversations in how the young people, especially through this initiative, Change the Code, can be influencing in some way the reset, and at the same time having a pathway to connect, especially with the UN agencies and the NGOs that are part of that.
Thank you, Laura. Hanan?
Yeah, I would also echo what Laura said and say include more women and WLOs, fund them directly. Because when UN receives a fund, it takes ages, and people on the ground cannot wait for how long you just, get bored and go for the UN employees. And I'm not here criticizing anyone, but I'm just explaining how situation is horrible on the ground, and cannot wear it, changing in a minute, be more flexible, more direct, and also in terms of the interacting with the intermediaries of funds, like in case of Sudan and in case of South Sudan, the long intermediaries with the pool fund is not a good way to work, because there is a lot of duplication, because there is no good coordination. Involve local actors in this decision making from the scratch, not after you take the decision, you just came and inform the local actors. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanan. And I know you are the author of an upcoming policy brief that we're doing together, which talks about WLOs, women-led organizations on the ground. We heard at the top from Reuven that half of women-led organizations have had to shut their doors. So we have to sit with that. We have to sit with that today. And at the same time, the opportunity, which is that if we can find ways, more flexible ways to fund, more trusting ways to fund that get that money directly to those women-led organizations, they will do incredible work. And they will do more with that money than was being done before when it was passing through multiple organizations to get to them. So that is our opportunity. That is the opportunity. It's one of the few ways that we can see forward with all of these cuts to humanitarian aid and development aid. We have an opportunity, which is to do things better. We've been talking about localization for a very long time. So that is part of our commitment with Women's Refugee Commission. We are a field serving organization, and we aim to serve the field by highlighting more of these women-led organizations and looking to explain and to showcase better, smarter ways of financing so that we can get through the real or imaginary obstacles to getting money to the front line. So thank you for that. Anyone else on this topic? Otherwise, I'm going to move to a next question. So I've got a question. Sasan from Syria. Thank you for sharing these stories. I'd like to know, how can humanitarian actors ensure safe, confidential, accountable reporting mechanisms for refugee and IDP women experiencing violence? How does the lack of livelihood support increase these protection risks for displaced women? And what integrated solutions can both address safety and economic needs? Rasha, if you'd like to jump in here, we'd love to hear from you, as we've got a colleague from Syria, but this is also a global question, so we can hear from others. This issue of reporting mechanisms, where there are abuses in the systems and failures, where do refugee women go? Who can they report to? Who can take on these stories? And also, as has been mentioned, as livelihood support decreases, we know women are more vulnerable. And what are the integrated solutions, even as we recognize that there's less money out there at the moment and there are less organizations out there? So what's the way forward?
شكرا كثير على السؤال، كثير مهم. هلا بالفترات السابقة كان في كثير من المنظمات المحلية عم تشتغل على تصميم آليات وطرق آمنة للإبلاغ للنساء، تكون مريحة للنساء قدر الإمكان، لأنه نحن بنعرف تماما داخل وخارج سوريا النساء عم بيتعرضوا كان لكثير من العنف الاقتصادي الجسدي وغيره، بالإضافة للوصمات الاجتماعية اللي بترافق سواء حالات الاعتقال أو غيرها. كثير من هاي المنظمات اشتغلت على هذا الموضوع وكان في إلى أثر إيجابي، ولكن الفكرة اللي انحكت من شوي اللي هي ضعف التمويل، عدم قدرة هاي المنظمات على استكمال عملهم حالة دون انه يتم تطوير هاي الآليات، وانه يتم العمل على تحديثها بحيث تواكب الامور اللي عم بيعانوا منها النساء. كيفية هلا الافتقار المائي للأسف، موضوع التمكين الاقتصادي للنساء كمان هو كان جزء من عمل كثير من المنظمات المحلية والدولية على يعني سواء على الطرفين، ولكن بالفترات الخاصة بالسنة ونص الماضية أو 18 شهر الماضيين، سوريا صار فيها تحول جذري بكل الأمور. يعني نحن سقط نظام كنا عم نحاربه 14 سنة، وهلأ نحن قدام نظام جديد، لساتنا بالمراحل الانتقالية. وهي المرحلة الانتقالية هي بتعني ضعف بالوضع الاقتصادي للنساء بشكل خاص، عمالة أكثر للأطفال، كثير من الأمور السلبية اللي عم نشوفها حاليا. ترافقت هي الفترة بإيقاف صفة أو إيقاف العمل على ملفات لجوء لكثير من السوريين والسوريات خارج سوريا، وبدأ بنقاش موضوع أنه سوريا دولة آمنة. هذا الشيء كله عم بيزيد العبء، مع بالإضافة بنرجع للفكرة الأساسية اللي هي إيقاف التمويل أو نقص التمويل بالفترات السابقة. كله عم بيزيد العبء على النساء بشكل خاص، كونهم هن من أكثر الفئات المستضعفة هلا حاليا بسوريا. نحن هلا حاليا بحاجة العمل على إعادة استراتيجية منظماتنا المحلية مع المنظمات الدولية، فهم أكثر لطبيعة الوضع السوري حاليا. ما فينا نقول سوريا دولة آمنة لكثير من الأسباب، وبنفس الوقت ما فينا نقول إنه لا يمكن إنه غير قادرين للعودة بشكل كامل، ولكن نحن بحاجة دراسة الوضع بشكل أكبر، وضع الأولويات للنساء والأطفال، وكيف ممكن نحن نضمن لهم عودة كريمة أو استقلال مادي قدر الإمكان. خاصة ما لازم ننسى أنه كثير من بيوت اللاجئين خارج سوريا وداخل سوريا هي مهدمة، هذا بيزيد العبء الاقتصادي عليهم. فالفكرة هي بالمختصر دراسة استراتيجيات عملنا وفق الوضع الحالي اللي عم نعيشه، تركيز على تمكين النساء أكثر، خاصة بالجانب الاقتصادي. هذا رح يخفف كثير من الأعباء حاليا.
Thank you so much, Rasha. And I think you draw attention as well to a really important point, which is that sometimes our international response systems move in ways that are black and white. Now people can return to Syria, so asylum is not needed. Whereas we know that these changes are complex. Even if people are going back to Syria, they're facing very complex challenges, and those challenges are going to fall on the shoulders of women disproportionately. Sometimes our global systems are not really fit for moments of transition. They are better fit for long-term issues in some ways than those moments when many things can fall between the cracks. And so that role of civil society, and I would add storytellers, researchers, journalists, human rights organizations, which were so active on behalf of Syrians, that we need feminists in those organizations as well, to help bring attention to these different gendered impacts. This will be our last question from the audience, but I think it is the one that we share a concern around for these frontline groups, which is what are the biggest challenges that you're facing because of the limits of resources? These massive funding cuts, they're happening at the top level, and then it just keeps going all the way to the front lines. So what is a way that you can help us understand the challenge that you're facing in doing your work? Haneen, can I come to you to kick us off, and we'll go around? This will be our last comment, so if you have any last word that you want to share, you can use the time for that as well.
Okay, so one of the biggest challenges that facing the WLOs is there is no sustainable funding for them. There is no what you call it, unrestricted fund. So this will let them. There is no have a strategic long-term funding. And when we had the US cut, they lost all their. Some of them they have a possibility to adapt, but they lost all of the things. Also, the harassment that it faced those women working in the WLOs on the ground, as you mentioned, there is no actual, and also the social stigma is preventing them of doing their work. Not everyone is brave and go out and speak like I get harassed because you took that ugly look. Also, we need to end the impunity and ensure the justice and accessibility for the funding itself for all of those WLOs in different countries, and not only build those personal relations, because I know Hanina, I know she's a good speaker. She can, I'm going to give her like $1 million. I'm not going to give Laura or Latifa that $1 million because I don't know them. So this is we're not going to work. Everyone should have. And safe access for the, safe access, also gender sensitive design for those kind of policies and program implemented on the ground. This is actually merge challenges with the solution, but this is one of the biggest challenges that facing every WLO that I have to speak with. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura, can we have a last word from you as well?
Yeah, of course, I cannot mention all the dimension of what is happening right now in the front lines, but I'm sure someone will be sharing through the chat two important resources that we launched as the Global Refugee Network. That one is a policy document that speaks about how funding refugee-led organizations is important, including women refugee organizations. But other is the GBV guidance that also speaks on behalf of women that is facing these problems. But what are the experiences, but what are they doing? What we know is that, especially through that consultations that we know, is even without resources, these women are taking and creating safe spaces for others. They are supporting survivors, they are mentoring young girls, they are advocating for their rights, they are building stronger communities, even without resources. Of course, the problem normally is to access those fundings. As Hanin mentioned, normally because the different situations, they cannot go in through the process and access those fundings. But what is really important is trust and having a different system that makes flexible funding for especially women refugee led organizations. If we trust and we try to transition and find ways that supports directly communities, we can find better solutions and better impact, especially in the communities that we want to reach. And of course, if we speak about funding and front lines, we are trying to find how this impacts and the numbers that can be impacted. So what we know and what we understand at this point, especially just working directly with the communities, is if the funding goes directly to refugee organizations, especially women refugee organizations, the impact is better. And the people in the community trust this organization more than the normal systems that already exist. So the impact that we want to reach is through that process.
Thank you, Laura. We need to know each other. We need to spend this time knowing and trusting each other. We've got just 2 minutes left. So Rasha and Latifa, I'm going to ask you for just a minute or less. We're going to round this out and we'll keep this conversation going in other channels. So Rasha, coming to you.
شكرا كثير. في نقطتين بس بدي أحكي فيهم. الأولى أنه من المهم أنه يكون اللاجئات والنساء بشكل خاص، بشكل عام عفوا، لهم وجود في غرف صناعة القرار، خاصة بما يخص الاتفاقيات الدولية اللي عم يتم الحديث عنها. النقطة الثانية واللي مهمة جدا بالنسبة لنا هي فهم التقاطعات بين كافة القضايا. يعني احنا لما بنحكي عن موضوع الجنسية فهذا بيعني حرمان من حق التعليم، حرمان من حق الصحة، من حقوق الصحة وغيرها. لما بنحكي عن موضوع الاعتقال بيكون في عنا حرمان من الجنسية نفسها. لذلك في عدة تقاطعات بين كافة القضايا اللي عم نحكي فيها. ما في أي قضية منفصلة عن الثانية، سواء من اللجوء لحرمان حق الجنسية لغيرها من القضايا. من المهم كمان فهم أنه أي قضية هي مهمة. يعني نحن بشكل خاص فريق ورشة ضلينا 5 سنين عم نحاول نقنع المانحين انه قضية حق الجنسية مثلا او حق اللاجئات انه هن يمنحوا جنسيتهم ولو بشكل استثنائي بهذاك الوقت، هي قضية مهمة بتعادل تماما التعليم والصحة وغيرها. هذه واحدة من المشاكل الكبيرة كنا عم نعاني منها. فمن المهم كثير فهم كافة التقاطعات بين القضايا واعتبار كل قضية مهمة. شكرا.
Thank you so much, Rasha. Hopefully we've gone further today to understand those complexities with your help. Latifa, a brief last word for us, please.
Yeah, that's really that's a good question. I just want to mention again the one important point is not having a harmonized approach to each situation. We're living in very, very different and complex contexts. So before even starting to see what we can do in each situation, it's really important to conduct deep research in everyone and to understand the complexity of the situation. That would help a lot to in having the successful implementations of funding by every stakeholder. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been an incredible panel. I have learned so much. I know our audience has learned so much. You've taken us to the ground. Latifa, like you said, we need to know the complexity. We need to have the words, we need to have the stories, and we can then go out and amplify what you have shared with us today. I do want to just take a moment to honor and respect that you have shared very deeply with us. Your stories help to transform us, to connect us to realities, to build a global movement, and to remind us that the experience of one person is the experience of all of us. WRC, Women's Refugee Commission, will continue this conversation. This is a launch of a series of dialogues and convenings on what protection looks like going forward. Protection, the access of basic rights and having basic needs met and living lives with dignity, what every person deserves. And we're looking to communicate with all of you here in the audience, with policymakers, with donors, and to ground all of this in the realities of refugee and displaced women and those that they fight for as well. So we thank you for being with us today. Please stay with us. Please sign up for our newsletter and our socials. We will be in touch with you. We will have more opportunities to continue this conversation and to showcase the work of these incredible women, activists, leaders, researchers. Thank you all, and take care, and see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.